The morning I saw Sora Flint tied down to those cold iron tracks, the train was already tearing down the valley. I had to choose let an innocent woman die, or dig up the man I swore I had buried forever. Pull up a chair. I am Jonah Kate. For years, that name meant something in these dry western towns. There was a time when drunks would whisper just because I walked into a saloon. Even hardened gunfighters pretended not to notice me, hands hovering right above their holsters. I wore a United States Marshal badge, backed a Winchester in my saddle, and held the foolish belief that a righteous man could stop pure evil if he just drew his gun fast enough. Then my wife Mira died. When I buried her, I buried the Marshal too. That is what I told myself for 5 years. My boy Carl packed up and headed east to study law. He always said he wanted to fight for justice without filling up more graveyards. Maybe the kid was smarter than his old man. I stayed in my rotting cabin, surrounded by busted fences, worn-out horses, and a mule meaner than a frontier judge. Every morning, I just fixed what I could. At night, I sat by the fire listening to the howling wind beat against the walls, like it was carrying ghosts from my past. Folks in town claimed I lived a peaceful life. That was a lie. A man can keep breathing for years after he has already died inside. That early morning, I rode out to check the dry creek bed near my property line. The sky was just turning gold behind the ridges. The air held that dry frontier scent, dust, sage, and burning wood from some distant cowboy camp. Everything felt exactly the same as always, until a scream shattered the quiet dawn. It was not a scream of terror. It was pure rage. A raw, living sound, totally defiant, like whoever screamed was not begging for mercy, but cursing the very men who thought they could wipe her from this earth. I gripped my reins tight. Now I want you to hear a hard truth that no decent man would ever admit out loud. I thought about walking away. Thought about heading back to my cabin, locking the door, brewing coffee, and convincing myself the wind was just playing tricks on me. I figured I had already lost way too much fixing other people's problems. I told myself that rusty badge sitting under my coat owed me absolutely nothing, and I certainly did not owe the world a damn thing. My horse took a few steps toward home, then stopped dead. Ignored the reins, ignored my spurs, just planted his hooves and snorted like that beast had a better conscience than I did. "Damn you," I whispered. I still do not know if I was talking to the horse, to God, or to myself. I turned the saddle and rode up the ridge. Crowning the hill, I spotted the black tracks of the Southern Pacific Railroad slicing through Apache land like a fresh wound. The iron shined under the rising sun. Way out in the distance, a thick plume of smoke announced a rushing locomotive loaded down with wood, steel, and sudden death. And right there on the tracks, laid out like a cruel sacrifice, was Sora Flint. I didn't know her name yet, but her stare burned right into me before I could even catch my breath. They tied her to the railroad ties with heavy hemp rope. Wrists and ankles pulled, tight skin broken open from her fighting back. Her Apache buckskin dress was ripped at the shoulder, heavily stained with dark trail dust and dried blood. Her hair was a mess, face beaten, lips split wide open. But she was not broken. That was the very first thing I realized. No crying, no begging. She didn't even look at her killers. She stared down that train like she wanted the iron beast to know she wasn't scared. About 30 yards away, 3 men warmed coffee over a campfire and passed around a whiskey bottle. They were laughing, acting like murdering a woman was just some cheap Saturday night entertainment. Brack Holt was the biggest. Bearded, wide, with a heavy gut straining against his gun belt. Nick Calder was skinny and twitchy, constantly tapping his pistol grip. Orrin Pike just sat there, dead quiet, staring with cold snake eyes. The locomotive blew its whistle. That sound cut through my bones. 15 minutes, maybe less. I sat up there, old, tired, alone, weighing the distances and my chances. 3 armed thugs, an Apache woman tied to the tracks an unstoppable train, and me holding a Winchester, an old Colt, and 5 long years of built-up cowardice inside my chest. Then I remembered Mira. Not her death, her life. tending to the sick when nobody else would even go near. You know she was right. She'd say a man doesn't need to save the world. Just never turn your back on the person right in front of you. I dropped my hand down to my rifle. The old marshal inside of me finally opened his eyes. I rode down that slope real slow, letting my horse find solid footing. Brack was the very first to spot me. "Morning, boys," I said, faking a calm I definitely didn't feel. "Those tracks run way too close to my land. What exactly are you doing here?" Brack just let out a crooked, ugly laugh. "Keep riding, old man. This ain't your fight." I pulled back my coat just enough to flash the U.S. Marshal star pinned to my vest. All three stopped laughing right then. "Maybe this tin star doesn't mean much anymore," I said, drawing my Winchester. "But this sure does." The train blew its whistle again. Down on the tracks, Sora Flint finally looked up at me. "If this story already has you tasting dust and feeling the danger in your blood, stick with me till the very end. Hit subscribe, because you and I are about to see how saving an Apache woman sparked a war against powerful men. And in Jonah Kate's last chance to save his soul, Bragholt spat in the dirt, never taking his eyes off my badge. For a long moment, nobody said a single word. You could only hear the distant train whistle blowing and the crackle of their dying campfire. Smoke drifted up slowly toward a sky that was just starting to turn orange, as if the dawn didn't care that a woman was minutes from dying. "That badge means absolutely nothing out here, old man," Brack growled, standing up slowly to challenge me. I barely smiled. "You might be right, but my Winchester shoots just as straight as it did 5 years ago." Nick Calder let out a nervous little laugh. He was young, hot-headed, and too proud to know when to back off. Orrin Pike was different. He stayed dead still, watching me with the cold patience of a coyote waiting to strike. I dismounted, rifle locked right on them. "Listen up, you have 2 choices. Saddle up right now, vanish before sunrise, and I will pretend I never saw you. But if you stay, someone here isn't going to live to see tomorrow." Brack took a step forward. "And who's going to stop us? Some old man who fixes fences for a living?" I kept quiet. I learned a long time ago that truly dangerous men don't waste their words. The train whistle sliced through the morning air again. This time it sounded a lot closer. 10 minutes left. Nick mistook my silence for fear. He flashed an arrogant smirk and slowly dropped his hand toward his 6-shooter. That was the biggest mistake of his life. The sharp crack of my Winchester echoed across the valley. Nick barely cleared leather before hot lead tore right through his thigh. He dropped to his knees, screaming so loud it silenced the morning birds. Brack and Orrin froze dead in their tracks. Next one won't hit a leg. I warned them, working the rifle lever with a smooth motion my old hands hadn't forgotten after all these years. "Now grab your boy and get out." Brack ground his teeth. For a second I thought he'd draw, but he did the math. He knew that train was closing in fast, and sticking around could easily get them all killed. Together they hauled up a cursing Nick who was desperately clutching his bleeding leg with both hands. Before mounting up, Brack pointed a thick finger right at me. "This ain't over, Jonah Kate." I stayed silent. I watched them ride off, kicking up a dust cloud that drifted south. But frankly, I had bigger problems than a cowboy's empty threats. Those boys weren't running scared. They were fetching a posse. I holstered my rifle and bolted for the railroad tracks. The dirt was trembling under my boots now. Every passing second made the roar of that approaching locomotive louder. I pulled my hunting knife and dropped to my knees beside her. The ropes were tied so brutally tight, her hands were turning pale. "I'm getting you out." She didn't say a word, just stared holes through me with wild, distrusting, dark eyes. I started hacking at the ropes binding her wrists. The thick fibers resisted, like they wanted her dead too. The first knot finally snapped, then the second. That damn train whistle blasted again. 5 minutes left. I moved fast to her ankles. While I sawed at the ropes, the solid ground actually started shaking beneath us. The moment that last rope fell away, I offered my hand to help her up. What happened next was a total blur. Her fist cracked right into my jaw. I stumbled back a couple steps, my mouth suddenly full of warm blood. She was up on her feet, swaying but defiant. "Do not touch me." Her Spanish was crystal clear, spoken with unexpected precision. "I never asked you to save me." I spat a wad of blood onto the gravel. "Perfect. We can argue about it after that train crushes us." For the first time, she whipped her head toward the tracks. You could see the black smoke billowing around the bend. Her pride finally surrendered to reality. Without saying another word, she just turned and ran. We sprinted down the hill together as screaming steel filled the valley. The train came roaring through like an angry iron beast. It tore past us so violently, the wind nearly knocked us flat. The iron wheels were spitting sparks everywhere. Thick coal smoke swallowed us whole, and the ground shook with enough heavy force to rattle a man's very bones. As the last caboose vanished, neither of us said a word, just heavy breathing. I passed her my canteen. She eyed it suspiciously. For a second, I figured she would decline. Finally, she took it. Drank real slow, staring at me right over the tin rim. When she finished, she handed it back, careful not to brush fingers. "Why'd they do this?" I asked. Silence fell between us. She was measuring how much to trust a stranger. I saw something I shouldn't. I waited. "Southern Pacific Railroad men are poisoning the Apache settlement's water. They want our people off this land. If poisoned water kills us, they save their bullets." Those heavy words hit harder than lead bullets. This wasn't just a simple hit. It was the start of something far bigger. I scanned the distant horizon, where dust hung still. Fresh hoofbeats started pounding against the dry earth. She heard them too. "They're back," she whispered. I shook my head slowly. They brought more men. I glanced down the trail toward my old cabin. It was the only spot left offering a fighting chance. My place is closer than the Apache settlement. If they want you, they go through me first. Sora Flint locked eyes with me, her anger finally gone. Just a silent question lingering in her stare. Was another white man worth trusting? She didn't say a word, but when she swung onto my spare horse and spurred behind me, I knew she had made her hardest choice. Sora Flint didn't ask a single question as we rode. Didn't ask who I was or why I risked my hide for a stranger. Didn't even ask where we were headed, keeping her horse a few paces back. Always sharp, turning her head every few moments to watch the dusty trail we traveled. That told me more than talk ever could. She survived by trusting nobody. And given what she saw, she had good reason. The wind whipped dust devils across the hills as iron hooves pounded dry soil. Miles of scrub cactus and red rock stretched right. To our left, the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks cut across Apache land like an endless scar. Suddenly, Sora broke silence. "They won't stop hunting me." No question, just stone-cold fact. I nodded without looking back. "I know. Then they'll hunt you too." I offered a tired grin. Stopped worrying about my own hide long ago. She stayed silent, leaving only howling wind between us. Finally, she spoke up. "Why'd you do it?" The question hung heavy in the air. I could say anyone would have done it, but that was a lie. Most men would have kept riding. Hell, I nearly did myself. "Because I still could," I replied at last. Her gaze dropped. She wasn't convinced, and neither was I. My cabin showed up on a small ridge near noon, a simple build of sun-baked weathered logs, complete with a narrow porch, small stable corral, and an old water tower that leaned for years without quite falling. Wasn't pretty, but it was built to take a stand. From there you could spot the main trail for nearly half a mile. Anyone coming would be caught dead in the open. I reined in my horse. "Welcome to the dullest spot in Arizona." For the first time, I saw Sora's expression soften. Not quite a real smile, but damn close. We swung down fast as I led horses to the corral. She was already scanning the place, sizing up the windows and stable position, measuring distance to the fence, the small water tank, and dry trees around the place. She wasn't looking at a home. She was analyzing a kill zone. We stepped inside. Simple as the outside. A rough wooden table, 2 chairs, iron stove, folded blankets, and an old cabinet stacked with ammo boxes. I grabbed a rifle resting on wall pegs and handed it over. She didn't ask if I trusted her. She just took it. She popped the chamber fast, checking the load, checked the action, and snapped it shut with the slick ease of a seasoned gunfighter. I raised an eyebrow. You don't handle that like a beginner. Her fingers gently stroked the rifle's wooden stock. My old man always said a 6-shooter only works if the man holding it stays ice cold. Smart fella. Sora's eyes shifted instantly. I had clearly struck a nerve buried deep down. His name was Tobin Flint. She went quiet for a moment before speaking. He was an Apache Army scout for years, knew these frontier valleys better than any drawn map. I just waited. She took a deep breath. She tried making the Southern Pacific Railroad men negotiate with our tribe, told them the water belonged to everyone. Her voice just gave out right there. They answered by shooting him. Neither of us spoke for a good long minute. I had seen too many Western tales end exactly like this. Rich men buying land with gunpowder when cash failed. I popped the cabinet open and started stacking boxes of heavy cartridges on the table. How many gunned down my father? 4. She looked right at me. The posse coming after us will be much bigger. Before I could answer, we both caught that familiar distant rumble. Hoofbeats. Not just one rider, a whole bunch. We hit the window at the exact same time. A small dust trail appeared on the horizon, still far out, but moving fast. Sora sized up the distance with one quick look. Under an hour out, I slowly shook my head. No. I pointed at fresh trail tracks. Those horses are riding light, no extra gear. I checked the horizon again. 30 minutes. Her breathing slowed down. Not from fear, but pure focus. We paced the cabin, checking every single window, door, and blind spot. We shoved a heavy wardrobe against the back door, filled water buckets, split up the ammo, and stashed loaded rifles in different corners in case a wild shootout pinned us down. As we worked, something unexpected hit me. I had lived there for 5 whole years. She had been there 5 minutes and already spotted 2 weak points I never even noticed. This woman was no victim. She was a survivor. When we finished fortifying the place, dead silence crept back in. Sora rested the rifle against her shoulder and watched the trail. You still do not know my name. I studied her closely. She went on. My people call me Sora Flint. The folks at the mission school insisted on calling me Sarah. I never felt like that name was mine. I nodded slowly. Then Sora it is. She gave a slight nod. And you? I glanced at the tarnished badge still hanging under my vest. Most folks just call me Old Man these days. For the first time, a genuine smile broke across her face. Small, brief, but enough to shift the whole room's mood. No, she shook her head. Tired men speak the way you do. Old men would have surrendered by now. Before I could even fire back an answer, a loud shout echoed from outside. Picture this next part with me. A deep, confident stranger called out. We know the Apache woman is inside. Hand over Sora Flint, and nobody else has to die today. Sora raised her iron without hesitation. I did the same. The real showdown had just arrived right at our front door. That stranger's echo just hung heavy over the valley. Hand over Sora Flint, and nobody else has to die. I didn't holler back right away. I crept over to a side window, making sure I wasn't offering an easy target. I peeled back a corner of the curtain and scanned the dusty road. 6 riders. Brack Holt trailed a few yards back, his arm still bandaged from that ugly railroad scrap. Nick Calder had also ridden back. His face looked hollow, leg-wrapped in a blood-soaked rag, but pure hatred in his eyes seemed to keep him steady in the saddle. But none of those outlaws were the man catching my full attention. Riding point at the front was a total stranger. He wore a long, dark duster, clean hat, polished boots, and rode a black stallion that walked with absolute chilling calm. Sat tall, completely motionless, like he was strolling down Main Street, not facing a fortified cabin. You and I both know truly dangerous men never have to prove it. That must be Dax Stone, I muttered. Sora tracked my gaze. Know him? I slowly shook my head. No, but I know killers exactly like him. She stayed quiet. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Outside, Dax moved forward. Jonah Kate. I've heard the stories. They say you were a solid marshal. Folks also spout a lot of nonsense. A bare shadow of a smirk appeared right under his hat brim. Then you know this standoff doesn't have to end in blood. Depends on who is willing to spill it. His face never flinched. Hand the woman over to Apache. I glanced at Sora. She held that rifle dead steady. No fear in her eyes, just a cold, striking calm. I turned back to the window. No. Short and final. Dax drew a long breath like he already figured as much. Shame. He raised one hand without turning his head. His boys knew the order instantly. Right then I saw one man pull a bow. Another lit an arrow tip with a torch. Cold dread ran straight down my spine. The first arrow sliced through the air and bit hard into the timber roof. A second later came another, then one more. Small fires caught along the roof, fed fast by the wind. The flames spread too damn fast. I lunged for the water bucket, but Sora beat me to it. She grabbed a blanket, soaked it through, and scrambled up the wooden ladder to the tiny loft without waiting for a word. She popped the roof trapdoor open, and heavy smoke instantly poured into the room. I caught her smothering the first flames with that soaked wool. No screaming, no hesitating, just pure drive. Right then, I stopped seeing her as some girl I rescued. She was a partner in the fight. A gunshot cracked outside. Lead blew through the window glass and slammed into the wood wall right behind me. I barked back with my Winchester. One outlaw hit the dirt for cover, but that was just a distraction. Heavy timber splintered in the back. The rear door. I barely took 2 steps before that old door blew inward. 2 gunfighters burst through, revolvers cocked. The first guy didn't even get his iron up. My Winchester roared. The lead threw him backward before he crossed the threshold. The second gunman squeezed off a shot. Lead whined past my ear and split a floorboard. I spun on my heel and pulled the trigger. He dropped heavy onto the porch, dead, motionless. I levered another round into the rifle. Kept my breathing steady, but thick smoke was quickly filling the place. Sora hollered down from above. The fire is spreading along the north side. I glanced up. Red embers dripped through the ceiling gaps. Another fire arrow whistled through an open window, rolling across the floorboards. I kicked it clear before it caught the dry pine. Get down here. Sora dropped from the loft, hair dusted white with ash. Soot smudged her cheek, and a scorch mark burned her arm. She didn't even pay it any mind. She darted to the window, braced her rifle, took a calm breath, and fired. A rider tumbled off his saddle yards away. She worked that lever action slick as grease. I never saw anybody pick up a fresh gun and run it that fast. Your father taught you well. She answered without looking away from the yard. My pa always said survival starts way before you draw. I nodded. Old man was right. Winning a gunfight is thinking ahead of the bad guy. For a few seconds, the gunfire went dead quiet. Just the timber cracking and wind whipping smoke through the cabin. Then a fresh voice called out from the brush. It was Dax Stone. Smooth and patient. You can hang on a few minutes more. Jonah Kate. But wood always burns down. I glanced around. The walls were holding. We still had brass to burn. But the bastard had a point. We couldn't hole up here forever. Sora reloaded her gun. Will they rush us? Yeah, and they will storm us all at once this time. Before she answered, an entirely different sound cut through the blazing inferno. Not gunshots, not the heavy hooves of Dax's gang either. It was a single horse, tearing hard toward the back property line. A second later, a loud shout ripped through the smoke. Jonah! Don't shoot! It is me! My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that voice. Haven't heard it in 2 long years, and never reckoned I'd hear it again in a burning hell like this. "Jonah, don't shoot it," is me. That voice echoed through the thick smoke before I could make out a face. I eased my rifle down just an inch. A rider whipped around the barn at a full gallop. He vaulted off the horse before it even hit a full stop, diving right through the rear door and dodging flames like he knew this cabin inside and out. When the haze thinned out a bit, I recognized him. Rusk Navarro. He flashed that weary grin only gunfighters keep after surviving one too many range wars. "Thought I'd find an old man mending fences," Rusk said, looking around. "Never imagined finding you fighting half the territory." We gripped forearms for a second. That was enough. We'd traded enough lead back in the day to understand each other perfectly. That is when Rusk noticed Sora. She kept her rifle dead steady on the front door. She didn't lower it. He didn't take offense. "She the Apache woman?" I nodded. "Name is Sora Flint." Rusk studied the rough bandages wrapped around her wrists, then the gray smoke drifting down from the roof. "So everything I heard down in town was actually true." "What did you hear?" His weathered face went dead serious. "That Southern Pacific Railroad hired a gunman to erase every trace of a witness." Sora slowly turned her head. "You mean Dax Stone?" "Exactly." The heavy silence lasted a few seconds. Rusk dropped a canvas bag on the table and flipped open the flap. Inside were spare cartridges, long fuses, and 4 sticks of dynamite wrapped carefully. I couldn't help but smile. "Still solving your problems the exact same way?" "Works pretty well." Sora stared at the explosives without blinking. "Where did you find those?" "A mining camp." He buckled the bag closed. "Let's just say some folks still owe me." A bullet slammed the outside wall. We all ducked down by pure instinct. Rusk crept over to a crack in the shutter. "They aren't going to rush us all at once." "Why?" "Because Dax Stone doesn't fight like some cheap outlaw." I caught his eye. "You and I know these killers. He is waiting for us to make a mistake." Sora took a deep breath. "Then we won't." I unrolled an old property map right onto the wooden table. It was barely more than a rough sketch I drew years ago, but it showed the stable clearly enough, the corral, the old water tank, and the dead trees surrounding the house. Rusk pointed at the stable. "Right here." He tapped the parchment. "If they try flanking us, they'll come this way." He grabbed 2 dynamite sticks. "I'll wedge these between the rafters. If the stable catches fire," he grinned, "then it becomes their problem." Sora started studying the terrain with intense focus. She grabbed cold charcoal from the stove and sketched several heavy lines across the map. "They will use these rocks too." She pointed out a small rocky ridge situated to the north. "From up here they will have perfect cover to shoot at our windows." I stared at her. Once again she was spotting things I never considered. "How do you know that?" She glanced up. "My father taught me. A hunter always looks for the exact spot where they themselves would hide." Rusk let out a quiet little chuckle. "I'm starting to see why they've spent so long trying to catch you." She didn't reply, just kept analyzing the terrain. For the next half hour, absolutely nobody wasted a single second. Rusk slipped out into the trees a few times, using the dead silence to rig that dynamite all around the stable. I barricaded the front door with 2 solid oak beams I had been saving for years to fix the barn. Sora checked every single window one by one, shoved heavy furniture around, and pried small holes between the wooden planks to widen our shooting angles, and set up fallback positions in case the thick smoke forced us out of a room. She didn't act like some damsel waiting for protection. She moved like a seasoned frontier survivor. When Rusk finally came back, covered in trail dust, he leaned his shotgun against the wall. "It is ready." He squinted toward the horizon. "If those bounty hunters push through the stable, they won't get far." The scorching sun slowly started to dip down. The brutal heat gave way to a cooler breeze that whipped up the flames still chewing on the roof. Picture this. For the first time since the shootout started, we sat around the wooden table. We didn't have coffee or any whiskey, just a tin plate of cold beans, some stale bread and water. We ate in dead silence until Sora finally spoke. I still don't understand why you're doing all this for me. Rusk looked up, then glanced right at me. I knew that question was meant entirely for me. I slowly set my spoon on the table. 5 years ago, I would have kept on writing. Nobody said a word. You know how grief changes you. After losing Mira Kate, I figured nothing left in this world was worth risking my life over. I studied my rough hands. They were still strong, but entirely covered in deep scars. Over time, a man learns to hide his pain behind chores, mending fences, tending horses, waiting out the days. I looked up at Sora. This morning, I realized that wasn't living. She stayed still. My father used to say, fear kills faster than bullets do. I offered a faint smile. Your father must have been a fine man. Her eyes flashed briefly. He was. Rusk broke the silence. And tomorrow, if we're still breathing, more folks will know his story. Nobody answered because we all understood the truth. That night, we weren't just defending a cabin. We were protecting the chance for truth to survive right along with us. And hidden somewhere in the darkness gathering over the valley, Dax Stone was also waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike his final blow. Night settled fully over the valley in a quiet, deceptive calm. From outside, anyone would have thought that old cabin was abandoned. Wind slowly stirred the dry timber. Crickets began their nightly song as faint smoke from the roof melted right into the darkness. But inside, nobody slept. Every last one of us knew dawn would decide who kept breathing. I turned down the kerosene lamp until just a tiny flame flickered on the table. We couldn't let light betray our positions. Rusk Navarro finished checking the makeshift detonator wired directly to the dynamite in the barn. If they cross there, they won't get a second chance. I nodded. Let's hope we don't need one either. Sora Flint stood still by the north window. Her eyes scanned the dark with a patience I'd never seen in someone her age. Suddenly, she spoke without looking away from outside. When the woods go quiet, it means someone is walking among the trees. I listened closely. She was right. Crickets kept singing, but the coyotes had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Rusk, she whispered. Dax Stone has already started moving his men. Nobody said another word for several long minutes. Every creak of the wood felt like a gun blast. Every shadow looked like an enemy. Sora finally broke the silence. Jonah. I looked up. What kind of man were you before dropping your badge? The question caught me off guard. I looked at my hands resting on the table. They still bore old scars, some left by knives, others by handcuffs, others by mistakes that never fade. I was a man convinced I could fix the world. I smiled bitterly. The years taught me it always finds a new way to break. Sora kept listening quietly, no pity in her eyes, just respect. I drew a breath. Look, Kate was far better than me. I hadn't expected to speak her name tonight, but once it left my mouth, the words just kept spilling out. When the fever hit town, everybody bolted their doors out of fear. She did the exact opposite. She went house to house, nursing the sick, bringing food, changing bandages. Never cared if they were rich, poor, white, or Apache. The memory tightened my chest. In the end, she fell ill. I looked down. I carried a badge, a gun, and all the territory's authority. I let out a dry laugh. But none of those things can put handcuffs on death. Silence settled over the room again. Rusk knew that story. He'd lived it with me. Sora hadn't. After a long moment, she spoke with unexpected calm. In my village, we believe those who leave don't want us to stop living. I stared. My father always said the best tribute to the dead is keeping your head held high. A lump caught in my throat. Maybe I'd spent 5 years needing to hear those exact words. She continued. Tobin knew they'd try to steal our land someday. She slowly opened a small leather pouch hanging from her belt. Inside was a neatly folded piece of paper. She spread it across the table. It was a drawing. It mapped the riverbed water storage sites and charcoal markings. It all started right here, she pointed, near the Apache settlement. I saw the poisoners emptying barrels in the dead of night. Rusk leaned over the map. What was inside, I don't know. But next day, fish died, then horses, and a week later, children fell sick. Anger slowly crept through the room. Sora kept talking. My father started gathering proof, plans, receipts, maps, names, dates. She looked right at Rusk. After they killed him, I carried on his work. He looked up instantly. Where is this proof? She took a long second to answer. Hidden. Nobody made a sound. Right then, Rusk figured out what I already knew. They weren't just hunting down a witness. They were after something a whole lot more dangerous. Now the whole hand made sense. I watched him tap a finger against the timber. Dax Stone didn't just ride in to kill Sora. He pointed at the map. He came to grab that evidence before government officials got wind. I nodded slowly. If those papers see the light of day, the Southern Pacific bosses will answer for murder, fraud, and stolen land. Sora's face stayed hard. That is why they will never stop hunting me down. Nobody argued with her. It was true. A heavy silence fell over us again. The quiet broke when Rusk snapped his head up, his eyes locking dead onto the door. And then I heard it too, a ghost of a sound. Not gunfire, not horses. Footsteps. Lots of them. Slow and disciplined, creeping through the pitch black, trying to keep quiet. Rusk killed the oil lamp, and the whole cabin plunged into total darkness. I could barely make out Sora's face in the gloom. She whispered, "They are here." I gripped my Winchester rifle, felt that cold steel right in my hands. I drew one single, very slow breath. Outside the cabin walls, the eastern sky was just barely starting to turn pale. Dawn was close. Now you and I know Dax Stone had waited for this exact moment to launch the assault he had spent all night setting up. The first gunshot shattered the quiet, right as that distant horizon started bleeding a pale gray. No rebel yells. No shouted threats from the dark. Dax Stone was never a man to waste breath when killing time arrived. That lead tore through a front window and bit hard into the log wall, kicking up a shower of wooden splinters. "It begins," Rusk Navarro whispered. He didn't need to. We were already set. I held down the back window, resting my heavy Winchester across the frame. Sora Flint covered the cabin front, sighting down the barrel of the rifle I handed her yesterday. Rusk hugged the side door, coiled and ready to move wherever the shooting got thickest. Outside, the prairie wind started howling hard. That is when the first flaming arrows sailed into view. One bit into the roof, another hit the wooden porch. A third cut through the dark sky like a falling red star, burying itself deep in the stable rafters. Those orange flames began to spread almost right away. "They want to smoke us out!" I hollered. Sora ignored me. She calmly worked her lever action, picked a target through the thick haze, and squeezed. A man sprinting for the fence line fell flat on his back before reaching cover. Her rifle lever clacked loud again. Another shot rang out. A second outlaw dropped his iron and crawled away behind some boulders, groaning in pain. We did not celebrate. Look, in a brutal gunfight like that, stopping to count bodies gets you killed fast. From across the dusty property, I heard a sharp, short whistle. Rusk barely lifted his head. They are creeping toward the stable. I smiled for the very first time since this siege began. Let them. 3 creeping shadows moved low through the sagebrush, entirely convinced they were invisible. They used the thick fire smoke to mask their movements while trying to flank our cabin. I counted 5 steps, then 3. One of the bushwhackers touched the stable door. Rusk gripped that rigged dynamite detonator real tight. Right then, a massive blast shook the whole valley. The explosion launched dirt, splintered wood, and rocks way over the roofline. That stable vanished inside a roaring cloud of fire and dust, rattling the very foundations of our house. I felt the hard ground vibrate right under my boots. When that heavy smoke finally cleared, 2 mangled bodies laid dead still among the shattered beams. A third fella desperately dragged himself away, painting a long, bloody trail across the dirt. Rusk slowly lowered his hand. They will not try flanking us there again. But Dax Stone still had gunmen, and he kept scheming. The arrows quit falling, and the shooting stopped. Dead silence rolled back in for a few short seconds. You and I both know that quiet. It meant no retreat. They were just shifting tactics. "Get ready," I muttered. I never finished the thought. 3 gunmen charged directly toward our main front porch. No cover, just pure speed. The lead outlaw raised a shotgun. Sora fired. Her bullet caught him dead in the chest, dropping him before he hit the first step. The second outlaw kept charging and pulled his trigger. Buckshot shredded that door, sending sharp splinters flying all across the damn room. Before I could reload, Rusk leaned out a side window. His 6-shooter roared twice. The outlaw spun around like a top and dropped straight to his knees. The third outlaw made the porch. I heard him smashing his rifle against the wood. I bolted for the entryway. Soon as the timber started giving way, I cracked open a small gap between those reinforced beams and fired right through it. The man fell straight backward without making a single sound. I slammed it shut again. I took a deep breath. Only then did I realize my hands were coated in black gunpowder. Sora kept watch by the window. Her breathing stayed dead even, her gaze rock solid. Hard to believe just yesterday she was tied to train tracks waiting to die. I didn't see a hunted woman anymore. I saw a fierce frontier warrior. Outside, a slow clapping started to echo. 1, 2, 3, steady slaps of hands. D. Stone finally stepped out from behind those boulders. He strolled with absolute calm right through his own dead men. He didn't even glance at them, just seemed more interested in studying the cabin. He stopped 30 yards away. I have to admit, Jonah Kate, his voice drifted clearly toward us. I really underestimated you 3. Nobody answered him. He offered a faint smirk, but these wooden houses have a fatal flaw. He watched the flames eating away at our roof. Sooner or later, they all end up burning. I looked around. Heavy smoke was slowly filling the room again. The roof beams were starting to groan. Glowing embers were already hitting the floorboards. We could not survive much longer inside that inferno. Dax took a slow step forward. I will make you one final offer. His cold gaze locked onto the window where Sora was standing. Hand over Sora Flint. Then he raised his eyes straight toward me, and I will let you and Rusk Navarro ride away from this place alive. A heavy silence crashed back down on the cabin. You could only hear the crackling flames. I looked at Sora. She knew right away that the choice belonged to her too. For a long, tense moment, nobody spoke, until Sora stepped right up to the window. She gripped that rifle with both hands and answered with a calm that chilled the crisp dawn air. I have spent too many years running. Her eyes never left Dax Stone. Today, it ends. Hearing those words, I knew in my gut that the toughest shootout of our damn lives was truly about to begin. Sora Flint's words just hung there in the blazing smoke. I have spent too many years running. Today, it finally ends. Not even Dax Stone answered right away. He watched her with a strange mix of deep respect and sheer disappointment, like studying a rare jewel about to shatter. Then he sighed. Such a damn shame. He slowly drew his revolver. My bosses wanted you breathing. He paused for a second. I do not have that problem. The gunshot came so fast I barely caught the muzzle flash. The window glass blasted into 1,000 tiny pieces. Sora spun violently around from the impact. The heavy rifle slipped from her hands. Her body slammed against the timber wall before collapsing straight to the floorboards. A dark crimson stain started spreading across the side of her dress. For a split second, the whole damn world went completely dead silent. I could not hear the flames or the gunfire or my own breath. I just saw Sora lying completely still on those dusty wooden boards. Something permanently snapped deep inside me. Sora. I sprinted toward her on pure instinct. Thick blood pooled between her fingers as she tried pressing the gunshot wound. She was breathing, but every gasp looked much harder. Rusk Navarro suddenly appeared right beside me. "Jonah, stay inside." I never even looked at him. I raised my Winchester, fired once toward the window. 2, 3. The bullets ripped right through the smoke. I didn't care if they hit. I just wanted Dax Stone wiped off the earth. Soon as the magazine ran dry, I pitched the rifle away. I drew the old Colt that had rested on my belt for years. I kicked that heavy front door wide open. The freezing dawn air slapped me right across the face. Dax was still standing there waiting. Like he knew all along it would end exactly like this. He barely smiled. "Now I recognize you, Marshal." I charged right at him. No more thinking, no more calculating, just pure forward momentum. Heard a gunshot. Felt hot lead graze my shoulder. I kept charging forward, fired twice. The first bullet missed him completely. The second round slammed right into Dax's left shoulder. He stumbled a step backward, but the bastard stayed standing. When I reached him, we collided with the force of 2 runaway horses. My Colt flew off his revolver too. We rolled through the dust, hammering each other with fury. Fists, knees, elbows. Pure, raw rage. Dax was younger, faster, stronger. One punch split my brow open. Another stole my breath. I tried pulling myself up. He slammed me down again. Hands locked around my neck, squeezing with everything he had. The world began going dark. I tried shoving him off. Couldn't. His face remained totally calm. "You should have taken my offer." Every word brought more suffocating pressure against my throat. My lungs felt ready to burst as my strength faded. I thought of Mira of Cal, thinking maybe this was the end I had spent 5 long years waiting for. Then I heard a cry. It wasn't mine. It was Sora's. Dax barely managed to turn his head. Too late. The blade sank right beneath his shoulder. His body jolted rigid, his grip loosening on my neck. I gasped desperately for air, rolling onto my side. Sora stood right behind him, her dress completely soaked through with blood. She could barely stand, but gripped with both hands the old Apache knife that once belonged to Tobin Flint. Dax tried turning around. She plunged the blade in again. Once, twice, and once more, until he stopped moving, and silence fell over the yard. Dax Stone collapsed heavily onto the dirt. Sora let go of the knife. For a second, our eyes met. She tried to smile, failed, and her legs gave out. I caught her before she hit the dirt, holding her tight in my arms as blood poured without stopping. "No," I muttered, pressing the wound with both hands. "You're not dying." She struggled for breath. Her lips barely moved. "You're heavier than you look." I couldn't help laughing and crying at the same time. "That means you still have energy to argue with me." Her eyes were starting to drift shut. "Jonah, no." I shook my head. "Don't speak. Stay with me. You can't give up now." Rusk came running. Blood covered one of his sleeves. I couldn't tell if it was his or from Stone Rail's men. He glanced at Sora's wound, his face darkening instantly. "She's lost way too much blood." He looked up at me. "We need the doc, right now." I nodded, hands glued to her wound. Rusk sprinted toward the horses and mounted in seconds. Before tearing off, he yelled, "Hold on, Jonah!" "I'll get that doctor, even if I have to ride across half the territory." I watched him vanish behind a long, trailing cloud of dust, turning back to Sora. Her breathing grew fainter. Fire kept devouring part of the cabin roof overhead. Around us lay bodies, smoke, and the bitter reek of gunpowder. None of it mattered. Only keeping her alive did. I pressed harder on the wound, touching my forehead to hers, and for the first time since I buried Mary Kate, I truly prayed not for myself, but for the Apache woman who gave me back my courage, right when I was sure I had none left. I don't know how long I knelt there beside Sora Flint. When a man waits for someone to keep breathing, time isn't measured in minutes. It's measured in heartbeats. Fire was still eating away at the roof. Thick smoke surrounded us, but I paid no mind to any of it. My hands pressed her wound relentlessly, while blood soaked my sleeves. "Don't close your eyes," I whispered. She was barely breathing, lips pale. Every breath seemed like a battle. "Listen to me, Sora. You can't leave yet." She didn't answer. I talked about anything to keep her awake. I told her about my horses and the old mule that always found a way to bust fresh fences. I spoke of Cal Kate, sure he'd grow into a better man than his father. I even talked about Mira Kate, not about her sickness or death, but her laughter, knowing that honoring life mattered far more than holding on to pain. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. I lost all sense of time until thunderous hooves approached at full gallop. I looked up. Rusk Navarro pulled up beside a light wagon. Riding along was an old, lean man with a gray beard, clutching a leather bag. He leaped out before the wagon even stopped. "Where is she?" "Right here." He knelt beside us. It was Doc Bannon. I had heard stories about him for years. You and I know frontier towns. Folks said he reeked of cheap whiskey, but his hands were steadier than any doctor around. One look proved that wound was downright deadly. "Bring her in now." The three of us managed to haul Sora onto the kitchen table. Doc opened his bag, pulling out forceps stitching thread and some laudanum. He wasted no time on questions. "Rusk, boil water." "On it. Jonah need light." I lit the lamp while Doc tore the dress around her wound. The bullet punched through her side. Luckily, it hadn't exited. Out here, that meant a fighting chance. It also meant more pain. Doc prepared his tools, glancing down at Sora. "Girl, I don't know if you can hear me, but you better be strong." He started. I held Sora's hand. Rusk held the lamp. The dead silence was only broken by the doc's dry orders. "More water. Forceps, now the bandage." At one tense point, Doc let out a heavy sigh. He dug the forceps in once more, finally yanking out a bloody bullet. It hit the table with a metal clink. "It's out." Nobody spoke. Finishing the stitches, he finally looked our way. "The worst is over, but now it's up to her." He covered her side with clean bandages, slowly packing away his gear. Wiping his hands, he spoke with dead calm. "I've seen strong men die from scratch wounds, and girls survive the impossible." He looked at Sora. "She's got a fighter's spirit. No doctor can teach that." Those next 2 nights were the downright longest of my entire life. Rusk insisted on taking turns guarding the property. I barely moved from that chair beside her bed. Every few hours, I changed the bandage, gave her water. I kept checking her fever and waiting. Just waiting. On the second morning, as the sun broke through the window, I heard a raspy voice. "Jonah?" My head snapped right up. Sora's eyes were open, staring at me with that same stubborn fire I'd seen back out on the train tracks. I felt a massive weight lift right off my chest. "Thought you were gonna scare us forever." She took a slow breath, then whispered, "Still making too much noise sleeping?" I couldn't help but laugh. I hadn't laughed like that in years. "And you still find the grit to argue. That means you're gonna live a long time." That very afternoon, Sheriff Maddox rode up, backed by 2 deputies. He carefully scouted the dirt body's guns, and finally Dax Stone's horse. Rusk found those saddlebags first. Inside was more than ammo contracts and maps. Signed orders, payment receipts, private letters. Everything pointed to the Southern Pacific bosses. Sheriff Maddox slowly read each document. His face changed with every flipped page. "With this, they can't claim they knew nothing." Sora forced herself to sit up. "We're still missing my father's proof." She eyed Rusk. "The hidden ones." He nodded. "We'll get them." Maddox closed the folder, and this time they'll reach government officials. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt justice finally had a chance. It wasn't a complete win. Dead men don't come back. Sora Flint wouldn't come home to his daughter. Mira wouldn't return to me. But you and I know, as long as someone defends the truth, there's always hope. Sora slowly turned her head toward the window. The smoke was finally gone. A fresh wind started blowing across the valley. It seemed to whisper the war wasn't over, but for the very first time, the tide was starting to turn. Nearly a month passed before Sora Flint could mount a horse again. Her wound still kept her walking slow, but her eyes had won back that same fierce determination I saw the day I found her on the tracks. Sometimes she'd step onto the porch at dawn, silently staring out at the rugged mountains. I never needed to ask what she was thinking. I knew that just beyond the horizon, the Apache settlement was still waiting. One morning, Rusk Navarro rode up with 3 Apache Council representatives. They didn't ride in armed for war. They came wearing the quiet pride of men who chose to defend their people down a different trail. The elder leading them shook Sora's hand first, then he faced me. She had kept the promise made to her father. Now we need her to keep moving down the trail. Sora cast her eyes down. She knew what that invitation meant. The evidence Rusk had uncovered, combined with papers found in Dax Stone's belongings, finally reached government officials. The investigation was only just getting started. But for once, those Southern Pacific bosses could no longer hide behind lies or hired guns. Still, they needed someone who could speak both tongues, someone who understood the Apache way without forgetting the white man's law. Everyone knew that person was Sora. When those officials stepped back to wait by their horses, she stayed standing right in front of my fence. I walked over slowly. I knew this moment was coming. She gave a sad smile. Me too. Dry prairie grass rustled in the wind between us. For a few moments, neither of us found the words. Then she spoke. Lying on those tracks, I thought I'd die, leaving my father's work unfinished. She looked up at me. Now I've got my chance. I nodded. And you ought to take it. She fell quiet, then asked the question she'd hidden for days. And what about you? I looked at my old cabin. The walls were mended, roof sturdy again. The barn was going back up. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't the same man anymore. I'll keep fixing fences. She chuckled softly. You're still a terrible liar. I couldn't help smiling. She was right. I'd spent too long hiding behind a routine that wasn't mine anymore. She stepped closer. The Apache Council needs someone who knows the white man's law, too. She breathed slowly. Not as a marshal, as a friend. Those 2 words meant more than any badge I'd ever worn. A friend. Not a savior, not a hero, just a man willing to walk beside others. I stared out at the horizon for a long moment. I thought of Mairead. For years, I thought locking myself away with her memory honored her. Now I understood she would have done the exact opposite. She would have kept helping folks, always. I looked back at Sora. Give me a month to set things straight here. Then I'll come. Her eyes sparkled, not with victory, but hope. She offered her hand, and I shook it firmly. Thanks for not riding away that day. I shook my head slowly. No thank you for reminding me who I was before I let pain decide for me. That same afternoon, Sora rode off with the Apache Council and Rusk Navarro. I stood watching until their silhouettes vanished over the hills. Then I walked back to the cabin. The timber still bore bullet holes. Some boards were still charred, the floor stained dark forever. I thought about replacing them. In the end, I kept them. Not as a monument to hatred, but proof that even broken places can become home again. A month later, I kept my word. I rode out to the Apache settlement. Over the years, I helped read contracts, explain laws, and stop elders from signing away what little they had left. Sora became the bridge between 2 worlds that had spent far too long distrusting each other. We never became husband and wife. Life doesn't always write the love stories that folks expect, but whenever Wirt gathered us around a campfire, a single glance recalled that morning by the train tracks. She had saved my life just as surely as I'd saved hers. Over the years, I learned something wearing a badge never taught me. Redemption isn't about erasing past mistakes. It's choosing to do right, time and again, whenever life puts you to the test. Some nights I still wake up to that train whistle, but I feel no guilt, only gratitude. Because that day, I didn't just pull a woman off those tracks. I freed myself from the prison I'd locked myself in for 5 years. Now let me ask you something. If you stood in my boots that morning, when riding away was easy and stopping to help a stranger was hard, what choice would you have truly made?